Hello and welcome again to another video presentation courtesy of investingsuccess.ca. Today is June the 10th, 2023. In today's video, I want to take a look at a German mathematician, astronomer, philosopher, born in 1571, died in 1630. His name was Johannes Kepler. Johann Kepler studied the planets, he thought about them, he observed their rotation, and he arrived at a series of observations which are still with us today and are still accurate today, much as they were back in his day when he first started thinking about them. In particular, the planets orbit the sun in an elliptical, almost an egg-shaped pattern, not in a circular pattern. Kepler said that as a planet gets nearer to the sun, there is a gravitational attraction from the sun, so he figured that the planet's angular momentum, the rate at which it's spinning, must get faster because of that gravitational pull from the sun. That was a pretty big statement to make in Kepler's time. And thanks to modern technology and the people at NASA, guess what? It's been proven to be exactly as Kepler thought it was in his day. And Kepler also said that as a planet moves farther away from the sun, the gravitational pull from the sun is going to start to diminish, and the planet's angular momentum, its rate of spin, is going to diminish. Now, there's a couple technical terms that are given to these events. When a planet is closer to the sun and spinning at a faster rate, we call that planet at perihelion. When a planet is farther away from the sun and its rate of spin has diminished, we call it being at aphelion. So perihelion and aphelion. Now, here's the big one. Kepler, being the philosopher that he was, he started to think about this perihelion, aphelion, planets spinning faster or slower, and he wondered, does the rate of spin of a planet, does its angular momentum affect human emotion? Does that rate of spin affect what happens here on planet Earth? Good question. And that's what we're going to explore throughout the rest of this presentation. So to put some numbers to it, here is a table showing the orbital periods of the various planets going around the sun. And so you can see that Mercury is situated very near to the sun, and it goes around the sun in 88 days. At the other end of the spectrum is Pluto, far, far out in space, and it takes 248 and a half years to make one long journey around the sun. Now you can see that because Mercury, for example, is so close to the sun, and it's going in this elliptical pattern, there is quite a variation then in its angular spin from perihelion to aphelion. So at its fastest, it's rotating almost 70 kilometers per second, and at its slowest, it's going something like 46. Venus is an interesting planet in that it is very nearly in a circular orbit, but not quite. So there still is a difference between aphelion and perihelion. Mars definitely has got a slight difference as well in aphelion and perihelion. So you could look up these numbers anywhere. I mean, any NASA website will have them. But the point is, each of these planets does have a differential between its maximum angular spin and its minimum. And that simply is a function then of being closer to or farther away from the sun. So let's take a look at Pluto. It was at aphelion, farther away from the sun, in the 1860s. Now, what you have to remember about these outer, slower moving planets is when we say that it was at aphelion in the 1860s, it literally takes several years for it to approach its aphelion event and then to slowly move away from it. And as well, when it comes to perihelion, it takes several years for it to get near to perihelion, achieve an exact perihelion, and then slowly start to move away. So, 1860s, Pluto, aphelion, what happened? Well, many things, obviously, but there's a couple notable events. How about the start of the U.S. Civil War? How about the assassination of President Lincoln? Pluto was at perihelion again in the 1980s. Now, the exact perihelion event was in 1989. So, what happened then in the 80s, several years prior to the exact perihelion and several years after? Well, the Berlin Wall came down. The AIDS epidemic was ravaging the globe. Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States, and he was introducing Reaganomics and a whole new set of policies on conservatism. The stock market had a plunge in 1987. Computer technology was emerging. The Iranian hostage crisis had set the stage for decades of ill will, bickering, and bad relations with Iran and other Muslim nations. Pluto was changing society, and it was rocking society in a very, very significant way. Now, thankfully, it's not going to be at aphelion or perihelion again in our lifetimes. Maybe that's a good thing. Let's take a look at Neptune. It was at perihelion um, either side of 1876. Now, what's significant about that period? There's a lot of economic expansion going on. It was the decade after the Civil War. The economy was getting rebuilt, and this Neptune perihelion event set in motion something that is called the Gilded Age. And that's when these big industrialists like Morgan and Rockefeller made their marks. They started acquiring railroads, oil companies, steel mills, and they made a lot of wealth. They dominated the banking industry. Will we ever see something like the Gilded Age again? Maybe. Neptune will be at perihelion in the years either side of 2042. So for many of us, that will be within our lifetimes. Let's take one closer step in now. Let's look at the next planet, Uranus. It was at perihelion in the months either side of August 1966. Now here's a chart of the Dow Jones. August of 66 is right here. Look what happened as we got nearer to that Uranus perihelion event. Market fell, and it fell hard. 26% loss. Uranus was again in the news. It was aphelion in August of 2008. So here's August of 2008 right here. But look what was happening. Leading up to that, the market was declining. In the aftermath of the aphelion event, look at what happened. The market utterly fell apart. And this demanded government bailouts. I mean, Bear Stearns went bankrupt. Merrill Lynch was absorbed by Bank of America. It was an ugly time. Ugly, ugly societal upshift. And it's something that I will remember for the rest of my time. Now, Uranus will be at perihelion again in 2050. So, will we see it in our lifetime? Some of us probably will, but it is a nasty, destructive planet. And when it revisits in 2050, things could get a little special again. Let's take a look at Saturn. Um, if I go back in history, Saturn was at aphelion. Now get this. It was at aphelion in the weeks on either side of November 1929. We all know about the crash of October 1929. So, was Saturn the root cause of the crash? Did it rattle human emotions so much that people were selling everything they had, people were losing everything they had, jumping out of windows on Wall Street? Such is the power of the planets. I would dare say that Saturn played a role in the events of 1929. Saturn was at perihelion in the early part of 1974. So January 74 is here. And look at what the Dow Jones did. If you consider that Saturn at perihelion acted as some kind of a trigger, wow, markets imploded, didn't they? Saturn, powerful, destructive planet. Saturn was at aphelion in September of 88. Now think back to the beginning of this presentation. We said that Pluto was at perihelion at that time. So maybe that's why the 80s were so disruptive. The fact that you had these two destructive change makers, one at aphelion and one at perihelion. Saturn was at perihelion in the summer of 2003. So what was 2003 noted for? The Desert Storm invasion of Iraq. The lynching of Saddam Hussein. Big geopolitical changes that are still with us today. Saturn was at aphelion in April 2018. What was special about 2018? Well, Donald Trump was in office, and let's be real, he was making some big changes. He sparked sanctions against China, a trade war, if you will. I could sit here for the next half hour and list off some of the changes that he implemented. Saturn is a change maker, and aphelion, April of 2018, absolutely, it tied right into what was going on. Now, Saturn will be at perihelion again in 2032, so that's in 9 years' time. So for many of us, we're going to see it again. It will be at aphelion in 2047. Let's take another step closer and look at Jupiter. Now, I'm not going to go too far back in history here, but I'm going to show you a couple things. Jupiter was at perihelion in May of 1999. So right in here. Shortly after that, the market struggled to move higher, and it got marginally higher, and then it fell. It struggled to move marginally higher, and it fell. It struggled again in late 99, but it just couldn't do it. I mean, this was the peak, if you will, of the tech bubble, the period of excess known as the 1990s, and Jupiter making its appearance at perihelion was significant enough to upset human emotion, and the markets recorded a top and a significant fall thereafter. So don't ever rule out Jupiter. It can be a significant change maker. Uh, Jupiter was again at perihelion in March of 2011. And similar kind of thing. The market did rally a little bit after the perihelion event, but it couldn't sustain itself. It tried to rally again, and it just couldn't, and it fell. Emotions were rattled. Emotions were raw. So what was going on? There was a lot of talk about a credit downgrade, um, and at the end, the Dow Jones fell 16% in the month of August 2011. So the trigger point seems to have been Jupiter at perihelion. Again, a change-making planet, one that has to be respected. Now let's come closer to here and now. Jupiter was at perihelion in January of this year, 2023. What happened? Here's the actual event right here. What happened as we entered 2023? Boom, market dropped. Why? Concerns over inflation, concerns over interest rates going up, concerns over the war in Ukraine. Human emotion was raw, it was agitated. Jupiter was spinning faster because it was at perihelion, and it just upset the human emotion. And the markets ever since, here we are in June of 2023, they've been volatile. Jupiter will be at aphelion at the latter part of 2028, so not too far away, 5 years. It will be perihelion in 2034. So get ready for a repeat performance of Jupiter, and just be ready for it when it gets near. Now, moving a little closer, let's take a look at Mars. When Mars is at perihelion, it is actually spinning 20% faster than at aphelion. So I'm going to show you an example here. In September of 2018, just a handful of days after a perihelion event, look at what happened. The market just imploded, 18% down. Sure, it recovered afterwards, but if you got caught in that downdraft, chances are you probably panicked right at the bottom and sold just before it recovered. But don't rule out Mars. Mars is the aggressor. Mars is hot energy. Mars will make things happen short term. Perhaps in your favor, perhaps not. So just be aware when Mars is coming and when it is at aphelion or perihelion. June of 2022. Look at what the markets had done. Down. And it culminated right at a significant low. So that's why I say sometimes Mars can work in your favor. You just have to be aware of when it's coming. And had you been watching this and watching the technical chart indicators, as soon as you got some sort of a indication that the trend was changing from bearish to bullish, you could have captured a good part of this rally. And there's other astrology components going on that cause some of these other ups and downs. But just be aware that Mars is a major factor in the overall market volatility. Now, let's take a look at Venus. It goes around the Earth in 225 days. So it's got some frequent aphelion and perihelion events. This one blows me away. March of 2020, COVID. Everybody's in a panic. The markets are selling off. But in March of 2020, the sell-off stopped. Sure, there was government and central bankers saying, we've got this. We're gonna support the economy with whatever it takes. But look at what happened in March. You had Venus right smack at that bottom, and it was a perihelion event, spinning faster. Now, going closer to here and now, you can look at the various aphelion and perihelion events, and you know what? They align very significantly to points of inflection, counter trend rallies that fail, points of inflection, tops. you got to look at Venus. You have to respect her. It will be at perihelion again, November 29th of this year. It will be at aphelion later this summer, August the 10th. Circle those dates on your calendar. Something is going to happen, and it will be a burst of volatility of some way, shape, or form, but it is going to happen. Let's finish up with Mercury. 88 days to go around the sun, and when it's at perihelion, it's spinning 50% faster than at aphelion. I'm just going to go back for the past, 12 months or so, and let's look at some of these events. May of 2022, there's a peak. There's a little interim peak in July of 2022. Here's an aphelion event in August of 2022. Literally, it comes 4 days after a significant peak. Here's the October lows of 2022 that we talk about. Mercury played a starring role in those lows. Markets rallied after that, reaching a peak, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 days after an aphelion event. Here's another swing low. Here's the start of a decline. Here's the start of a rally. And so it goes. So Mercury has got to be watched very carefully, and its aphelion and perihelion events will be very frequent. And so, how do I conclude? Kepler was right. As above, so below. The angular spin rate of these planets, these aphelion and perihelion events, somehow do affect the human animal. We are hardwired, even though we don't know it, we are hardwired to what goes on in the cosmos. And that really then is the premise for everything that I talk about in, the Financial Astrology Almanac, in my book Follow the Trend, where I show you how the markets often react to Fibonacci extensions and retracements. I try to incorporate all of that into my various subscription-based newsletters. As above, so below. We are connected in some way, shape, or form to what happens in the cosmos. And if you accept that, if you embrace that idea, investing and trading on the markets takes on a whole different meaning. All right. Thank you kindly for watching this little video on Johannes Kepler. And I encourage you to keep an eye on perihelion and aphelion events in the cosmos. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you again.